So I'll be putting up the most recent polling data on screen right now. And as per that, Anukumar Dissanayake of the JVP leads with 50% of all adults. Yeah. So that's a -1 from the previous time, according to...
-1 from our latest estimate of intentions in December. But in fact, as I think one of the editors, one of the media organizations asked me about, that we had actually changed our December estimate slightly from what was published the previous month. So we do improve our estimates as we go.
Okay, so Anukumar Dissanayake at 50%, Sajid Premdas at 36%, the President Ranil Wickremesinghe at 7%, and an SLPP candidate also at 7%. There's one question I want to go into before I take on the Twitter questions. What about undecideds and no preferences? Is there something in the polling that asks that question? Because it's not represented in the...
So there are two aspects to this. The presidential voting intent question is handled differently to the general election voting intent question. So for the general election voting question, we're going to ask which party you want to vote for. There's a whole list of parties in the list, and there's an other, and we ask people now if they say other, who the other might be. And typically, if it's very common, we'll add it to the list, right? So I would imagine Frontline Socialist Party got into the list, and then actually turns out not many people will vote for Frontline Socialist Party. Maybe they're not even going to stand, who knows? So we add it, but we monitor that. The presidential question is a bit different, and it has to be, because not every party is going to stand. And in the nature of the election process, you have to win 50% of the preference votes. So you have to keep it relatively simple. So for the moment, we've been giving, well, actually, originally we gave people only 3 choices, which was previous president and then Sajid Premdas and Anura Dissanayake. And then, those are the only choice. And then when Ranil Wickremesinghe became president, we added that in. And now we have a generic SLPP candidate because I don't think former President Rajapaksa is going to stand again. So we give people these 4 choices, and they can say none of them, and people can respond, we're not going to vote, or we're not going to vote, well, we might not vote for any of them, but we try and get them to make a choice. And some for people who say they can't decide, we do ask them, well, if you can't decide, who would your preference be? So there is a second follow-up question. Because in a presidential election, you don't have all your choices. It's constrained. So that's what we do. I mean, there are obviously other people who are making in the media who kind of signaling they're going to stand in the presidential election, but we decided to keep it simple, so the current president and the 3 major parties in the country. So that's the first part. On the issue of people who don't, we have a significant percentage of people in the voting questions who don't answer. So they refuse to answer, or they give evasive responses, like we don't know, but we don't think it's really a don't know. It's just a nice way of saying they don't want to answer. And this only affects the voting intention question. So in the rest of the survey, 90% of the survey, the response rate for most questions is above 95%. For the voting intent, for understandable reasons, it's typically been around 25%. It was even higher 2 years ago when we first started. And so what we do with those people who say we treat them as missing data, they probably have a view, but they're not going to tell us. We model, for the stuff that we publish on voting intent, we actually model what their likely vote preference would be. So that's how we deal with it. We don't ignore them. We actually look at that data, and then we use the statistical methods to essentially say, if somebody tells, and I'll give you what I mean by that, you might have, let's say we have a Tamil voter from Kilinochchi, right? And he might have told us that, and let's say it's a he, it's a male, may have told us that they voted for, let's say, ITAC in the general election last time, but they voted for Sajid Premdas in the presidential. Okay? And this person hasn't answered. And we think, they don't want to answer. So what we do is we estimate the probabilities that he would now vote for, say, Sajid Premdas or Anura Dissanayake or Ranil Wickremesinghe, and we get an output which says, look, he's probably 70% likely to vote for Sajid Premdas, he's 20% likely to vote for Anura Dissanayake, and we use those probabilities as we do the final analysis.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So then I'll just go straight to the questions that are on Twitter. So one of them asks, I don't know if you can tell us what questions are specifically asked, political questions. You gave a few. You want to just list out?
We do report in our social media communications the actual question. It's on the image, but if I remember correctly, for the voting questions, we asked if there was a general election today, who would you vote for? And then to initially let them respond, but then if they're not responding, we'll give them a list. The list has about 16, 17 parties. There are a lot of parties here in Sri Lanka. And then similar question for the presidential election. But the other thing I should say, before we ask, those are the last two questions in the survey, pretty much. Before we ask those questions, we also ask them, and this has a higher response rate typically, if they voted in the last two elections, and then if they did, who did they vote for? That's the 2019 and 2020 presidential general elections. So we typically get more information from that, and then we ask them, who would you vote for today? And then some people typically drop out, they won't answer it. So that's the political module. There's a preceding module that we ask, which is also sort of politically related, where we asked for people's opinions, favorabilities of favorability ratings, and also job approval ratings. So job approval ratings for key, I would say, constitutional figures. So the president, the prime minister, the leader of the opposition, and the health minister, because the health ministry, we track all the health ministers. And we also track the favorability of previous health ministers, the ones who left office. And then we have favorability questions. The favorability questions, now people don't get all of them, we randomize them, but typically people are asked about some current politicians. So again, the key politicians, Sajid Premadasa, Anwar Dissanayake, Ranil Wickremesinghe, are always asked, and then they get a random subset of other, typically members of parliament, so from various parties. And then we also have a historical section. We actually have been tracking the favorability ratings of historical figures, including D.S. Senanayake, Dadi Senanayake, Mr. Prabhakaran, even Mr. Wijetilleke, I guess the founder of the JVP. So those we've been asking for a long time, and essentially all the previous presidents, major presidents and prime ministers, we have historical people, they're dead. We have been tracking ever since the past 2 years. So just get a sense of what people think about historical figures. So, and then we get into this voting questions. And now all of this is after, 20 minutes, 25 minutes of questions on their health status, household situation, their employment, their income, their COVID status, so right at the end.
I don't know if you can answer this one. Since IHP started, what's been the largest 1% change in a 6-month period? Would you be able to say off the top of your head, roughly?
Well, maybe not 6 months. I'll tell you what the big changes that we observe. Okay. We started this in, I think, August 21. And at the time, President Rajapaksa, at least amongst people who responded to those questions, very favorable, people who vote for him, large bunch of people who would.
What date was that?
August 21. So we started at the end of August 21. And so 321, basically, anyone who answered the presidential question said they would vote for him. But we did have a large bunch of people who wouldn't answer the question, but they also told us they voted for Sajid Premadasa in the previous election. So, you could deduce these are sort of, some, depending on who you supported, affected how you'd answer that question. Yes. And so we observed that. And then his support really began to weaken late 21. So late 21 in the rest of our survey, and I think I told the previous time I came here, we began to pick up problems in the economy. We came out of lockdown, but then people were again not working, and there were problems with the supply chain. We were picking that up in late 21. People's income going down, people didn't work because they couldn't get supplies, or demand was down, or customers couldn't get there, or workers couldn't turn up to work. So we were picking that up in late 21. His support began to soften, I think. And then I think probably after January, support for the SLPP and president began to slowly weaken. And I think that was as economic effect. So I think, 2021 to early 22, you see this softening of his support. And then things really went, I think probably February, March, it just fell off a cliff. His support basically collapsed. And I think the one critical event which really had a huge impact in our tracking, we also tracked whether people had power cuts and how long. And it was when the power cuts hit, I think it was March, that's when his support really collapsed. I think the one event that really affected people's lives, brought it home, was the power cuts. And so then things went downhill, as you know, till all the chaos in the middle of 22. And then the SJB MPP picked up support. The SLFP may have picked up support initially. We're not sure that's just random noise, but it appears in our data. Maybe people leaving the SLPP and stopped at the SLFP as a way station. Maybe that's the best place to stop, right? Yeah. And then moved on. And I think MPP and SJB benefited. And so what we saw after the current president was elected in the middle of that year is that support improved for SJB, MPP, went up a bit for Anura Dissanayake and Sajith. And then later on, we saw some increasing support for Ranil Wickremesinghe and the UNP. So that began to pick up a little bit. And I think from mid-22 to mid-23, what we saw was pretty stable situation, actually. I mean, the thing with SJB support, it's been flat.
Yes.
I mean, this is a remarkable thing. The SJB support has been flat. And what we saw, then there was this kind of fluctuation between Ranil Wickremesinghe UNP and Anura Dissanayake and MPP, which, for those of us who might think in political terms, or maybe that's a very kind of strange ideological thing, but I don't think people are ideological in that sense. But we saw that swing, and that basically fairly stable, but I would say from mid-22 to mid-23. And then early 23 was the IMF agreement. We saw an initial improvement in economic optimism. We tracked consumer confidence also in the survey, and we saw a big improvement there. And I think the situation has improved. Food insecurity is still terrible, but it began to alleviate a bit also from the middle of last year, after current president became president. So there was some improvement, I think, in objective conditions, an improvement in people's feelings initially. But then what we see from, I would say, late or mid-23, the IMF agreement was, I think, March. After that initial boost, we see consumer confidence going into decline again, and people continue to face hardship. And then what we see, the UNP initial boost has dissipated. Ranil's boost has dissipated. Maybe why he's still not decided whether he's going to stand again. As I can observe this in the press. And what you've now seen in the past year is, from the collapse of the previous government to mid-23, in that chaotic period, SJB, MPP sort of level pegging. What we've seen in the last year is MPP has taken a statistically very significant lead. It's a real lead of about 10 points, 15 points, and they've maintained that. And I think that's really the story. So the initial softening of support, this chaos, the government collapsed, then this level pegging of these two parties and this kind of initial boost for the UNP. And then in the last year, what we've seen is that PPB appears to be consolidating support. And it's now taking support from some of those old SJP voters.
So given that according to your polling, the NPP has consolidated the lead and even grown its lead, there's been some allegations on Twitter that the IHP and yourself are some kind of surrogates for the JVP. I just want to give you the opportunity to respond to those allegations.
So I'll say two things to that. First of all, we're not a surrogate. We have no official communication interaction with the JVP NPP. I mean, obviously, I work in the medical field. I can tell you a lot of doctors increasingly support the NPP, and people I know as well. But we don't have any interactions with them, and they definitely do not fund us, and certainly no political party has given us funding for our polling. Although I would add, we're happy to receive funding from any source to continue our research. We're researchers, so we love having money for research. Yes. So if people want to give us money, any of the political parties, we're happy to take it. The only thing we would do is that as researchers, we wouldn't allow any sponsors to directly influence the actual questions or how we interpret it. So I think that's all I would say. I have no problem with that. I would say maybe, unfortunately, nobody has given us any money from the political party. Maybe they should, because I think most of them don't do proper polling, don't do any polling, actually, from what I understand.